Episode 1 of Mao introduces us to a mystery filled world where the line between humans and spirits is dangerously thin, while also setting up the strange connection between a girl from the present and a boy trapped in a cursed past. Right from the beginning, this episode makes it clear that this isn't just a supernatural fantasy, but a story about hidden identities, forgotten trauma, ancient curses, and a terrifying truth waiting to resurface. The episode opens in a very unsettling way, with rescuers at the site of a terrible accident. There's blood, panic, and desperate shouting as they discover a child who is barely clinging to life. They say she isn't breathing, and from the very beginning, the atmosphere feels heavy and eerie, almost as if something unnatural is tied to this tragedy. That child, of course, turns out to be Nanoka Kiba, and this horrifying event becomes the core mystery surrounding her life. After that dark opening, the story shifts into a much lighter and more ordinary setting. We see Nanoka in the present day, living what appears to be a fairly normal life. She wakes up, heads out for school, and interacts with her cheerful grandfather and the eccentric Funa Uozumi, who insists on giving her one of her dreaded healthy smoothies. These moments are played for comedy, and they do a good job of showing Nanoka as a lively, expressive, and slightly dramatic girl. On the surface, she feels like a normal high school student, but that normality doesn't last very long. As Nanoka heads to school and interacts with her classmates, we learn about the tragic accident from 8 years ago. Her classmates begin talking about the deserted Fifth Street shopping street, a place surrounded by eerie rumors and strange sounds. At first, it just sounds like another ghost story, but then it becomes personal. Someone accidentally brings up Nanoka's parents, and we learn that they died in that very accident. Nanoka handles it calmly on the outside, but the memory clearly still lingers deep inside her. She recalls how, when she was only in first grade, the road suddenly collapsed while her family happened to be passing through the area. Somehow, she ended up outside the car, covered in blood, and not breathing. She should have died that day. And in her own words, she really did die. That line alone immediately changes the whole tone of the story. Because now we understand that Nanoka is not just someone who survived a tragic accident. There is something deeply unnatural about what happened to her, and she herself doesn't fully understand it yet. As the episode continues, Nanoka and her friends pass by the deserted shopping street after school. At first, it seems like they're just joking around about rumors and ghosts, but Nanoka suddenly hears something strange. Unlike the others, she can clearly hear a mysterious noise coming from somewhere nearby. Her curiosity pulls her forward, and before she fully realizes it, she ends up stepping into a completely different world. And this is where the episode truly begins. Nanoka suddenly finds herself in what looks like an old-fashioned version of the same shopping street, but everything about it feels wrong. The people there are dressed in outdated clothes, the atmosphere is eerie, and worst of all, the people around her are transparent. At this point, Nanoka is understandably terrified. She can't process what she's seeing, and her first instinct is to assume the obvious: ghosts. But before she can even escape, things get worse. A strange creature attacks, and in the middle of this chaos, Nanoka meets two mysterious figures, Mao and Otoya. Otoya is strange but polite, while Mao immediately gives off a much colder, more dangerous presence. He doesn't act like some kind of heroic savior. In fact, when Nanoka desperately asks for help, he casually refuses and says she should handle it herself. At first, this just makes him seem like a jerk. But then the episode reveals why he said that. The creature attacking Nanoka reacts strangely to her blood, and somehow, despite her fear and confusion, she ends up surviving far more easily than she should have. Mao quickly notices this and begins to suspect that Nanoka is not an ordinary human at all. This leads to one of the first major mysteries of the series. Why does Nanoka's blood affect Ayakashi? When Mao later heals her arm, he comments on how unusual her body is, and after she wakes up, he directly tells her something she absolutely does not want to hear. He says she might be an Ayakashi. Of course, Nanoka completely rejects this idea. From her point of view, she's just a normal girl who somehow wandered into a nightmare full of transparent people and monsters. But Mao doesn't let it go, because from what he observed, there is clearly something unusual about her. After barely escaping and somehow returning to the real world, Nanoka is left in complete confusion. Her friends don't understand what happened, and to them, it just looks like she got dirty and acted strangely for a moment. But to Nanoka, the experience felt completely real. And that uncertainty is one of the strongest parts of this first episode, because now Nanoka is stuck between two possibilities. Either she imagined all of it, or the world is much stranger than she ever realized. The next day, things only get weirder. At first, Nanoka tries to brush it all off and convince herself that it was just some kind of bizarre dream. But then, while heading to school, her body suddenly starts moving at an impossible speed. In a split second, she launches forward so fast that it shocks even her. And this is the moment where she can no longer deny it. Something has changed inside her. Her body, her senses, and even her connection to that strange world are no longer normal. She becomes overwhelmed, dizzy, and frightened, and eventually returns home in a shaken state. Even there, she can't calm herself down because now the evidence is too strong to ignore. Whatever happened in that accident 8 years ago, whatever awakened after she returned to that shopping street, it is real. And if that's true, then the only person who might actually know what's going on is Mao. So despite her fear, Nanoka decides to go back. This brings her once again to the mysterious version of Fifth Street Shopping Street, where she reunites with Otoya. Unlike Mao, Otoya is much easier to talk to, and through him, Nanoka begins learning more about this strange hidden world. We find out that Mao and Otoya are not from this town, and that they only arrived recently because they are investigating what's happening there. That already tells us this place is not just haunted or cursed in a simple way. Something much bigger and more unnatural is going on. While Mao is out gathering information, Nanoka gets a closer look at the bizarre world he moves through. At the same time, Mao encounters another strange creature and confronts it directly. Through this confrontation, the episode reveals something very important. Mao is an onmyoji. That means he isn't just some random supernatural fighter. He's someone trained in dealing with curses, spirits, and hidden forces beyond ordinary human understanding. And unlike Nanoka, Mao is completely used to this world. He fights with calm precision, handles monsters without hesitation, and carries himself like someone who has seen horrors far beyond what we've witnessed so far. But as the episode keeps going, we begin to understand that Mao himself is also deeply tied to a dark supernatural past. When Nanoka finally gets the chance to speak with him again, the episode begins unpacking its biggest lore reveal so far, the curse of the Byoki. Mao explains that he is living under a curse connected to something called the Byoki, a horrifying cat-based kodoku. And honestly, this part is one of the creepiest and most interesting sections of the episode. The idea of kodoku is deeply unsettling. It refers to a curse created by trapping poisonous creatures together and forcing them to devour one another until only one survives. That final surviving creature becomes something like a living curse, used to poison or torment others. And in Mao's case, that surviving cursed being was a cat demon known as the Byoki. So when Mao says he lives under the curse of the Byoki, we instantly understand that whatever happened to him was not some small accident. He was deliberately targeted by something truly horrifying. Even worse, Mao admits that he doesn't remember exactly who cursed him or how it happened. That missing memory becomes extremely important, because if the truth was erased from him, then someone or something powerful must have wanted it hidden. The episode also reveals that the curse still affects Mao physically. His back is covered in painful markings, and wounds continue to surface on his body. He's clearly still suffering from something that has never fully left him. This detail adds a lot to his character, because up until this point, Mao seems cool, mysterious, and powerful. But now we realize that he's also damaged, cursed, and carrying pain that has clearly followed him for a long time. And that makes his connection to Nanoka even more interesting. Because while Mao is trying to understand who or what she really is, Nanoka is also starting to realize that her own past might be tied to the same kind of supernatural darkness. Eventually, Nanoka reaches her emotional breaking point and tells Mao what she has been struggling with. She insists that she's human, or at least she always believed she was. She explains that her parents were ordinary people and that everything changed because of the accident in front of that deserted shopping arcade. And then, in the final major reveal of the episode, she remembers something crucial. On the day of the accident, she saw a monster. That one memory changes everything because it confirms that what happened 8 years ago was never just an accident. Something supernatural was there. Something caused it. And whatever Nanoka became after that day may be directly tied to the hidden world Mao is investigating now. By the end of episode 1, Mao does a really strong job of setting up its mystery. It gives us a compelling female lead in Nanoka, a fascinating and suspicious male lead in Mao, and a supernatural world that feels creepy, dangerous, and full of unanswered questions. What makes the episode especially effective is that it doesn't reveal too much too quickly. Instead, it gives us just enough pieces to make us curious. Who or what is Nanoka really? Why does her blood affect Ayakashi? What exactly happened during that accident 8 years ago? Who cursed Mao with the Byoki? And most importantly, how are their fates connected? Overall, this was a really solid first episode. It mixes horror, mystery, supernatural lore, and character intrigue in a way that feels very engaging. And if the series keeps building on these secrets properly, Mao could become a very interesting story. So yeah, episode 1 definitely did its job. It pulled us into its world, introduced its mystery, and left us with just enough questions to make us want more.